We're going to be running 308 LAP. It's a dual shield flux core stainless. We're going to be using 2 gas mixtures.
We have the Select Arc 308 LAP flux core dual shield. Running it on 7525. You can also run this wire with the 100% CO2, which will show you guys some arc shots of the 7525 and the 100% CO2. I'm just going to throw down a couple of stringers on this stainless steel plate.
We are running 7525 CO2 with the 308 LAP. This is an all-position dual shield flux core, and you can run 100% CO2 with this as well. Right now it's on 110 power at about 205 inches per minute and 22.5 volts. Now you want to make sure you're following that line on your first pass, since it is a first pass, but we're around 115 amps.
So we just ran our first pass on 110 volt. I'm going to go ahead and chip it. And now we're going to switch over to 220 volt, and I'm going to run my next pass right here, melting into this toe.
With this being our second pass, I usually place my wire about an 1/8 inch to the left or right of the first pass, which allows my puddle to just nick the toes of the first stringer pass. Now we're on 230 volt at 300 inches a minute at 25 volts. Now the Select Arc 308 LAP, the sweet spot for it is somewhere from 300 inches a minute to 425 inches a minute.
We just ran the 308 LAP on 220. Gonna go ahead and just knock this off real quick and show you. So you see this weld is a little bigger, so it actually overtook my first weld. I should have stepped off the first weld just a little bit, and it wouldn't have covered as much. We're going to switch over to 100% CO2, and we're going to run a bead right next to it.
We're going to stay in 71T1, but we're going to switch this to 100% CO2, even though we're running flux core stainless. And then we're going to drop it down to 205 inches a minute at 24 volts, which would give us the maximum output on 110 volt power on the TransSteel 2200. Now the recommended contact tip to work distance for this wire is going to be 3/4 of an inch, and I recommend keeping that 3/4, otherwise the amps will fluctuate. So I had it set to 125.
We just ran our pass with 100% CO2, and as you can see, I don't have to do much chipping. It's just going to peel itself off.
Here we have a 1/4 inch horizontal fillet weld. We're going to run 100% CO2 on 230 volt.
We're going to run this T-joint with 100% CO2 on 230 volt around 300 inches a minute.
With the machine being on 230 volt power, it allows us to be at that minimum range of the recommended wire feed speed for the 308 LAP. And we're somewhere around 310 inches a minute at 26.5 volts. And we're running that 3/4 inch contact tip to work distance with about a 20-degree drag angle.
Based on the wire manufacturer specification, we're looking for 5/8 to 3/4 stick out. I'm going to knock this flux off and see how it looks.
We're going to run a 1/4 inch fillet weld vertical up with 100% CO2 on 230 volt power.
We have the vertical up stainless steel on 100% CO2. So when I ran this before, I did at a neutral torch angle. So just coming up as is, and I run probably about a 1/2 inch stick out just so I can watch the puddle form and see my speed as it builds.
I'm kind of digging this 100% CO2 with this stainless dual shield flux core. Now, when you're running this, make sure your wire's facing right in the joint. I like a neutral, and we're around 275 inches a minute at 24.5 volts. Now, this was about a 10 to 15% decrease in comparison to our horizontal fillet weld in the last section. So just keep that in mind. Keep your contact tip to work distance at least a 1/2 to 3/4 inch, which gives us about 140 amps.
Just vertical up with 100% CO2. I hit it with a neutral torch position on this weld here, so we'll knock it off, see what we get.
Let's put that on repeat, but with 7525 CO2 and on 230 volt.
We're going to run the 308 in a vertical up with the 7525. Wire specification says about 1.5 volts less than what we ran the 100% CO2 with. So what I found is when I switched over to the 7525 synergic line on the Fronius TransSteel, it was already 1.5 volts less with the same wire feed speed. So I think just setting it and going, we're going to see how it works.
See, and I thought the 100% CO2 was doing a good job, but I do like the 7525 CO2. You can see how well uniform the puddle is. We're at 275 inches a minute at 24 volts. And just make sure you keep that contact tip to work distance at that 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch. You don't want to go too far out, otherwise you get worm tracks.
The 7525, sadly I didn't have to chip the slag off of it. It decided to fall off after we got done welding. So by the looks of it, I say it run pretty good.
We're going to finish this up with 80 thousandths flat lap joints with both gas mixtures all at 110 power.
Lay down our last two welds, one with 7525, one with 100% CO2 on 1/8 inch lap joints.
This first lap joint here is with 7525 CO2. You can tell we're way below the minimum as far as wire manufacturer recommendations. We're about 165 inches a minute at 21.5 volts. But if you had to get 80 thousandths plate done, you can do it with this wire, even though it's not within the recommended.
Ran this lap joint with the 7525, and as you can see as I came through, my stick out got a little too long, so it thinned up the weld, and as I brought my torch back in, it became more uniform.
And this is with 100% CO2 on that flat lap joint on 110 volt power in the TransSteel 2200. You can hear the difference between this and the 7525. We're at 190 inches a minute at 22.8 volts. Now we are running about 3/4 inch contact tip to work distance, but if you had to do 80 thousandths, you can do it with this wire at 115 amps.
I just ran the 1/8 inch lap joint on 110 power. This is the 100% CO2 at 190 inches a minute. Go ahead and knock this off, see what we got.